It is 8:45. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Waving out to the people. First of all, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Todd Carpenter. I'm the Executive Director of NISO. We are going to be talking about a project on collaborative collections development. We call it the Collaborative Collections Lifecycle Platform. It's a project that we're trying to get started. Joining us today is Boaz, Nadav from Lehigh University. Sebastian Hammer is here with me in person, and Trevor Dawes, who is the librarian at the University of Delaware, is also joining us virtually. We have a short session, so we're going to pound right through. Libraries have sought to collaborate on collections development for years. There's been a lot of initiatives, both through the consortial environment and the partnerships that exist through consortia, but also through other approaches to purchasing and selecting material for their collections. Part of the challenge that we've seen with some of these initiatives have to do not necessarily with the desire, but the technical infrastructure as well as the governance tools necessary to make collaborative collections efforts work. And there's a group of, I don't know, maybe 20 or so people who started talking about this and see if we can build some of this infrastructure, build some of this governance. And we've been talking for about the last year, a little bit over a year, about what this process could look like, building on a number of initiatives that have been taking place in the community. Big Ten, Recap, Hathi Trust has done some of this work, CRL, Boston Library of Consortium East. All of these consortium and partnerships have really pushed the boundaries, and Boaz and Trevor are going to be talking a little bit more about some of those initiatives. But we've pulled together a pretty significant group of organizations led by NISO, PALSI, and Lehigh University, but with partners such as Gwilla, Ithaca, CRL, a variety of individual institutions, Tulane, Pittsburgh, Denver, and some technology providers, IndexData, Paratex, and publishers as well. Because we see this as an entire ecosystem project. And what we want to do is create communities and networks of institutions that really is built on trust, because that's the real challenge when institutions are working across in partnership with each other. Like, who is going to be responsible for purchasing these things? Many institutions have long considered, like, compared each other with how many items are in their collections. When we break down those institutional barriers, like, there's competitive issues between institutions sometimes, but there's also governance and who's buying what for whom, and even what are the, some institutions, say state institutions, are kind of bound by, why are you buying things for some other institution outside of the state? There's a lot of challenges from a governance and ownership perspective, but also a sharing perspective. So we have a vision of how would this ecosystem work, both from an individual institutional level, but also at a systems level. How are we exchanging information about what is in your collection? What do you have? How do you know you have it? Where is it? How do we get it from one institutional building to another when, crossing state lines? There's a variety of questions here, and we are looking forward to pushing forward an initiative that builds some of that governance infrastructure, but also the kind of middleware that gets information between a variety of library management systems. So that's a very high level entry into where we're talking about. We'll get into more detail later, but I'm going to pass it over now to Boaz, who can give you a little bit more detailed information about what we're doing and where we're headed.
Hi, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from Tel Aviv, Israel. I'm here in 78 degrees Fahrenheit, enjoying the sun. And I wish I was with you right now in Charleston, but that didn't work out. Welcome to the session and welcome to all the virtual attendees. So as Todd said, this has been kind of an ongoing interest for very many years, I believe, trying to figure out a way by which we manage collections together. I think that, when you are thinking about what happened just in the past year and a bit, when libraries had to kind of question again the reasons why we do what we do, how we serve our users in a different way. Maybe we need to be quicker. Maybe we need to think again about the workflows that support digitization, think about CDL, thinking about other things that are happening right now as a result of COVID. Also, the pressures of the financial situations that some libraries ran into and some consolidations and otherwise. It seems that 2022 is the year to really come up with a final kind of way to a process by which we begin to negotiate those issues in a more serious manner than we used to. What we have proven, I think, in the past year and something that we are good at things. We can be quick, we can be adjusting our services and what we do in the libraries to provide remote access to collections. We can build infrastructures together. We have some successes already with, Folio, Reshare, previous success in different places. We have some hubs of excellence around infrastructure like Hati, like what Gold Rush is providing, Unsubit. We know that there are ways by which we can manage collections in a different manner than we're used to. That's definitely an advantage, and also facing the situations that we're facing nowadays that are kind of rolling is important. We're exhausted, this is the first real conference we had after a very long time, and I think that staff and librarians, but not only us, also the industry, also the publishers that surround us, we work extra hard to kind of keep things going, and what is cool about this project is kind of it captures the imagination. It kind of brings people together, and the main point here is that we really need now to rely on each other. And if we want to do things differently, now is the time to kind of extend the relationships that we have in our consortia, in our kind of bigger kind of, like functional hubs and other things, and put them together and kind of think how do we manage in a balanced way new vision-based collections, thinking about collections of diversity and inclusion, area of urgency, need to collect more than we can on a personal level. We have many challenges, but thinking about this infrastructure, it doesn't only provide us an opportunity to kind of manage it on the system level, but it also, as Todd said, is kind of facilitator to think about standards, to think about communication with each other, to think about how we do big business and small business together. So that's kind of hopefully what we're coming together with this CCLP project. Todd mentioned it's been a year and a bit that we're working on this. We hope that this particular focus can provide more advocacy towards open access. We can provide maybe infrastructure to help people to communicate with each other and kind of, develop new ways to explore expertise around area studies, for example, and other areas of the world that we're not very good at covering. It's also an opportunity for publishers and providers to kind of rethink their business and maybe explore new business models and provide us with new ways to go. We can do great things, and this is a way that we may be able to do that. The next slide. All right. If you can. All right, I see myself. That's cool. What I want to say is that in principle, what we want to build is an open system that will be able to provide a vendor-neutral environment for vendors to work in, for librarians to work in. The governance model is significant, obviously, because we want to make sure that the system is governed in a democratic, pro-library way. We definitely want to, from the get-go, to build this system in collaboration with the other providers and the publishers and university presses and non-for-profit providers. We've been working for them for a little more than a year. We had a core group of folks that after we had some kind of open sessions with lots of people, we named ourselves the Avengers because we met too often maybe, and we were having a lot of fun. We ended up with a core group that kind of came up with a bit more around what it's going to do, how we're going to work it out. And we even came up with a proposal to IMLS that lots of organizations have shown interest in and are supportive of. And we see it as a beginning. So, if you're interested and you want to join and be part of the conversation, even part of the work, we'd love to partner with you. And we can build it. So we really believe that that's achievable. So I'm going to now turn to Sebastian, I believe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Boaz, and thank you everybody for being here with us. So I'm Sebastian. I've been working in library technology for about 3 decades or so. I am really passionate about the problem space of library technology needs. That's been my career. I'm particularly passionate and interested in the ways that we talk together about software and software roadmaps and how we create better relationships between strategic challenges that are facing libraries and the types of technologies that we develop to meet those challenges, not just in the moment, but over time as needs change and as software needs to evolve to meet those changes. So that's led me over the past few years to participate really deeply in putting together the social structures of the Folio project and Project Reshare, as well as the technology infrastructure that we've put together to kind of meet those structures. So that's some of the background and insight that I bring into these conversations. So we've talked about community building and governance. And again, I see that as a really critical aspect of this project. It's not just a group of technologists coming together to build a widget. It's a community of interest representing libraries, publishers, consortia, technology providers, service providers that see a shared need to enable libraries to get better at making collective decisions about their collections. And not only that, it's publishers wanting a deeper engagement and a data-driven conversation with libraries and with the academy about the types of things that they should invest in. It's not an us versus them kind of thing. It's trying to figure out a way to invest in common infrastructure in a way that we can all feel ownership of and all have agency in. So we talk about social structures and we talk about approaches to talking about software roadmaps that are designed to meet those. So those initial conversations have kind of led us in the direction of a set of early sketches of the types of functions that we see this platform kind of solving and addressing for people. So I want to share those with you just to get a little bit more specific about the vision that we have. So we started by thinking about the types of stakeholders and the types of communities of interest that this project is really looking to serve and address. We thought about, again, publishers. We thought about everybody from selectors in the library to library directors and consortial leaders and so on. And so what are the challenges? What are the types of things that we want this ecosystem to address for people? So we thought about the notion of foundational elements, like having a director of libraries with everything from contact people to technical information to codified information about retention commitments at high levels, interest in collaboration and so on, based on an open model so that everybody has the right to contribute and everybody has the right to consume this data. A critical part of it is understanding what is held in a given consortium or across the landscape, and what can be had. So a picture of holdings across a consortium of group of libraries, as well as the catalog of what is out there to be had, is a critical part of it. So this is thinking both in terms of union catalogs or aggregations of metadata and the ability to make it easier to aggregate that kind of data, but also knowledge bases for electronic resources and catalogs of products from vendors and from publishers and aggregators. We think about discovery mechanisms and collaborative mechanisms to allow groups of librarians to come together across groups of libraries and make kind of collective decisions in what's hopefully an easy workflow. So that implies communications mechanisms, ability to kind of message back and forth, to share information, to build collaborative workspaces. And ultimately, it leads to the ability to negotiate jointly at a consortial level and other groups of libraries that want to make joint purchase decisions and really joint collection lifecycle decisions. What all of this kind of gets us to is that a critical part of the infrastructure for all of this is really about data. There are tons of different types of data that needs to be gathered into one place and made actionable in order to drive these types of decisions and in order to even enable us to think about building these types of solutions and products down the road. So we think about usage data for both electronic resources as well as circulation data for print materials, resource sharing, statistics. We think about information coming out of collection analysis tools. We think about print retention commitments and so on. We'd like to look at ways to make it easier to lower the threshold and lower the friction for bringing these types of data into one place. A lot of it exists. A lot of it lives in different types of systems and library management systems or vendor-based platforms. What we'd like to try to do is to build infrastructure, to build middleware, and most of all, to promote and push for standardization and open interfaces to make it easier to get that data into one place and to make it actionable. Ultimately, the goal here is not to build, again, a product, but to create an infrastructure to enable lots of people to build products and to add value and to create functionality, all in an infrastructure and an ecosystem that we have some joint saying, that we have joint governance of. So that's really what we're trying to get with all this. We start with a notion of strategic vision, a set of strategic challenges that we see facing different stakeholders that are at the table. And we get to a notion of functional requirements, and we end up with a need to push the entire community in the direction of greater data portability, essentially thinking about open platforms that span all of these different stakeholders and service providers that exist in our community. So this is all the piece. A lot of what really excites me about this project is ways that we can think about lowering the friction for moving data around, bringing it closer to the people that need it. In this case, a lot of it is really thinking about, again, driving decisions about collection lifecycle management, not just in individual libraries, but across libraries and consortia and whatever groups of libraries decide that they need to collaborate to make things happen. So that's my piece. Thank you. I think it's over to Trevor, right?
Yeah, there's just a...
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. So imagine
being in an academic institution where you want access to a resource that is not owned by your library. You could be a member of the public and it's not owned by your public library either. Right now, we go to interlibrary loan or resource sharing, whatever that department is called at your library, and request it, and that works well. It works extremely well most of the majority of the time. We get the item that we want, either in digital format or in tangible format. And if it's tangible, we need to return it to the owning library. But what if we could build on this success and move towards a truly collaboratively owned collection where perhaps if it's a tangible item, you wouldn't have to return that physical item. It simply stays in your library until it's needed by another scholar at another institution. Happens quite often in some public libraries, not so much in academic libraries, because when we own something, we own it and it must be returned to us. So my colleagues have just shared the use case as well as talked about the technical background for the CCLP. And certainly as a library director, I'm looking forward to the realization of this platform. We have long talked about collaborations in building joint collections, jointly owned collections, and we've seen some examples of this with varying degrees of success. There's some libraries where you may collect in this area, we'll collect in this area, we will build on, and we provide access to them either electronically or through interlibrary loan. We've seen other examples where we have a shared storage facility and the materials can travel again relatively seamlessly either through courier or ILL. And we've seen other models where, such as East, where different institutions will decide on retention, where retention policies are decided on jointly by participating institutions, and I'm sure there are other models as well. There was an earlier slide that showed some examples of the different models. But each of these has their own infrastructure, their own governance system, their own way of doing things. What we're hoping to do, and what I think we all would love to see, what many of us would love to see, is that more seamless way of us truly jointly owning our collections and having access to them. This infrastructure, the current infrastructures rely heavily on interlibrary loan and resource sharing, which, as I mentioned, is great, but that has a significant impact on our budgets. That is, as it means we still need to purchase everything in order for them to be available through interlibrary loan. A collaborative ownership model, whether for digital or tangible resources, means these materials are purchased jointly. So through economies of scale, we can perhaps reduce the budgetary constraints on building our collections. Obviously, for tangible items, there is a reduction in the need for space to house these, the space and cost in housing these collections. And perhaps most importantly, it provides for greater access to a wider variety of materials that are needed by our scholars and researchers, irrespective of where they may be. And this is exactly what we're hoping to build with the CCLP, and certainly what, as someone in my position or anyone who values our collections, which I would argue to say we all do in our libraries, then this is something that we would want to see. I'm going to, this is, I've mentioned we've seen many examples of these. My colleagues have talked about the infrastructure that we're hoping to build. I'm going to stop here and perhaps open the floor for some questions from the audience. I've been interacting with those of you who are chatting in Pathable. And I think it seems you can also use the chat if you're in Zoom. So thank you, Susan, for your comment in the chat. So you may chat in either place, and we're monitoring both places.
So before we move to questions, which we should have time for, a few minutes, where we stand in this project, we are seeking funding for this initiative. Boaz mentioned we've submitted a grant proposal to IMLS. We're also seeking some other funding through other channels. Ideally, we're also putting together a new work item proposal to get this off the ground in 22. We're taking a phased approach to this because it is a very large undertaking. So it will involve the development of a community governance structure, as we've just discussed, assessing the landscape of the various projects that are taking place, what's succeeding, what's not, why haven't things succeeded, doing some kind of research about the landscape, and then developing some model workflows, model user experiences, identifying gaps in systems. Where do we need to improve our systems? What new middleware is necessary to work these various independent systems together? And then build a functional prototype of some of the key elements of this infrastructure as open elements, because we don't want to create an ecosystem where, in order to partner with library A, B, and C, you have to be using vendor solution, which is owned by so-and-so. We want to create an ecosystem where it shouldn't matter which ILS system you're using. You should be able to function and partner with whomever you want to. Build this infrastructure and then move towards adoption and implementation over the next several years. We're talking about a fairly significant project over many years time frame. We're realistic about what this is all going to entail. But having 20 plus institutions behind us representing a good chunk of the American and Canadian library community puts us in a good place. So as Trevor said, happy to take some questions if anyone has any. Trevor, if you're monitoring Pathable, I can't see it up here.
Yeah, so yes, there's a question. I'm curious about the importance of ownership in this vision. What does ownership mean in this context? Is legal collaborative ownership important, or are we looking for something a little different, a shared stewardship model that libraries feel confident about? And perhaps let me say what I'm thinking, and others can join in as well. For me, I would really be interested in the legal collaborative ownership model. So if Boaz is at Lehigh, for example, and if we are partners in the CCLP, which we hope to be, then we have an agreement that between the two of us, we will purchase a copy. A copy of this item is purchased, whether it's an electronic item or a digital or tangible item. But we both jointly own it. Right now, yes, this is going to be the general counsel folks in our organizations are, we'll have to work through all of those details. But this is certainly the vision that I have for this project.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, Trevor. Love that. And we have some models like that here and there. We've been trying to do that when there was more of a kind of a legal entity that could, come up with, like those type of legal agreements. Lots of our consortia are not necessarily having those safeguards, and they're not necessarily the ones that can do those things. We want to definitely promote the conversation. So this is another kind of advantage of, thinking about CCLP and maybe joining it, because like CDL, it's kind of a chicken and the egg. So if you don't have a way to do it, it's harder to kind of bring it to the front as a real case to the consuls and otherwise. We definitely want to also think about what does it mean on the longer term. So lots of those arrangements are kind of dependent on a particular political structure that is kind of put into place for a couple of years or more, and then it kind of dissolves. Or even, when we're thinking about collaborative collection development that has been sort of forefront of several libraries for a while, like Too Cool and other cases. It really depends on systems that can support those models, but not only on the daily kind of conversation or decision making, but also on the registry side. So to kind of make sure that once we have a legal agreement in place between Lehigh and other libraries, let's say, then we have a way to make sure that the daily decisions take that into account. Our systems right now are kind of not ready for that level of sophistication. And we want to kind of think about how we build systems that are enabling our structures to flourish, to grow, to kind of become more kind of transparent also, and also more friendly to this type of a conversation. So ownership, it's kind of involving definitely on the CDL side. Think about ownership is very significant, but CCLP is a format agnostic system, or a bunch of systems, and we're thinking about different manifestations of the kind of legal and workflows and standards and all of that to make sure that we can do what we need to do. Because we really, don't have too many choices. Definitely, there is a trend to reinvest resources from kind of generic collections into vision-based collections. And if we really want to do that seriously, we need to figure out how we do the generic stuff between ourselves. And that pressure is there already, and we would like to kind of try and resolve it.
Trevor, are there any more questions?
Yes, and I'll probably pose this one to you, Todd or Sebastian. Have you had any preliminary conversations with publishers? And if so, what does the pricing structure look like? And what prevents the costs for a collaborative instance from increasing to the point where they're equal to what individual institutions would pay for their own instances?
Well, there are publishers involved in the conversations that we've been having. We have not discussed pricing structures for several reasons. First, it's inappropriate within a NISO context to be discussing pricing models. So there's legal reasons to avoid those conversations. But I think there's been some understanding and awareness by at least some of the publishers that we've been speaking with that there are business model changes happening in our community that are affecting their structure and their where sales to the library market are headed. And there's an awareness of library budgets by the publishing community. There is an awareness of that, the situation. I don't think as Boaz said, I don't think this project is designed to significantly lower the overall spend for the publishing community. I think it is, how can we more effectively deploy the resources that the libraries have, build efficiencies across the library community, and allow for investments in new areas of scholarship that aren't well funded because they're only available to maybe 2 or 3 or 5 institutions. So how do we build a greater pool of resources for those smaller niche things that, envision centers of excellence that institutions could build in, say, the literature of sub-Saharan Africa. Most institutions are not collecting that in any way. So is there a way to redirect some of the community's funds in that direction if those resources are communally owned? So I don't think, and this is part of the reason that some of the publishers have expressed an interest in this, in how can we more efficiently allocate the resources that the library community is spending on their collections and acquisitions.
So this is more of a comment than a question, but I think there could be some comment on this as well. Sounds like one of the big issues is getting publishers on board and dealing with copyright issues. I'm also curious about the cost, both monetary and environmental, of shipping items around the country and the world. Well, maybe you want to go ahead, Todd.
I'll jump in here because yesterday we spoke, Sebastian and I were on a panel yesterday talking about controlled digital lending, which might be a way in which institutions can share those resources in a control legal, sort of like interlibrary loan, as many institutions are presently doing, but do it in a more ecologically friendly manner. And can we do that in a way that respects the rights of the publishers, controlled in a way that it maintains a 1-to-1 ratio of ownership to lending, and builds on the existing infrastructure that we have for sharing between institutions. Now, granted, I think we need to do more work in this, and that's why NISO is pursuing a project on controlled digital lending. But that's possibly a solution to the, are you seriously going to ship physical books from 35 institutions back and forth? And what's the ecological impact of that? Well, there's a technological solution if we can make the infrastructure work.
I would also add, in my imagined scenario, we also had, because this item is owned joint for the physical items, because they're owned jointly, they don't have to be shipped back to the location from which it came. So there's only shipping in one direction until that item is needed by someone else. It doesn't leave the borrowing destination. So, I mean, this is, again, this is desirous, and we could do this now if we had different models in place, but we don't. And I see Sebastian at the microphone, so I'll turn this to you.
Thanks, Trevor. I was kind of weaving a little bit about this in the chat too, but one thought I would put in there is that we aren't sort of imagining a monolith, right, where everybody does the same thing with all materials all the time. I think part of the purpose, and we talk about this as collective lifecycle management, is the idea that there is an understanding of usage across a consortium, but also an understanding of which part of the collection are important for long-term preservation in order to support specific research areas in any given institution. So you can make decisions in a fairly granular way, is the vision, across a consortium, and say, hey, here's some material that we really need to own locally because it's high use. Here's some material that we can let float, as you say, Trevor. Here may some material be some material that we digitize and put into high density storage for CDL purposes and do interlibrary CDL to make the material live that way. But the idea really is to bring the data up to enable people to look across these collections and make decisions in a more granular way, informed by data, about how to manage that material to balance out shipping costs and storage costs and all that stuff. So that's my thought.
So I recognize that it is 9:25 and that's the end of our session. If anyone is interested in joining this merry band of Avengers, feel free to please reach out. Please reach out to either myself or Boaz, Sebastian. We're happy to talk. As I said, this is going to be a project that we're launching in 22, fingers crossed, with the support of the community. So we're going to need a lot of partnership, from every segment of the community. So if you're interested, please get involved. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.